G'day folks, Wren here, and it's time for another Five Friday. Now this Five Friday is inspired by my favourite thing of all time, which is Lord of the Rings. It's my favourite thing ever. I love Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and Middle-earth and everything. It's amazing. I mean, just look at this cover as well. Isn't that amazing? I have a whole shelf filled with Tolkien. Any editions that I can find of The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, I buy. And like, Tolkien is just the master of fantasy, isn't he? It's one of my favourite things. And when you're seeing this, I'm going to be in New Zealand. So for my 30th birthday, I decided to take myself to New Zealand to do a Lord of the Rings tour, which is super awesome and I'm so excited for this. So I'll be going to Hobbiton, and I've planned to be at Hobbiton on my actual birthday, and the entire trip was planned around that one specific date. But it's one of my favourite things, and I have found that there are some books that remind me of Middle-earth for whatever reason. It could be the creatures, it could be the quest type thing. So I'm going to do 5 book recommendations that kind of remind me of Middle-earth. So first up is a comic, and this is The Savage Beard of She-Dwarf by Kyle Latino. This is such a fun comic. I had so much fun reading this, and the way that this reminds me of Middle-earth is we have a dwarf who is searching for a lost dwarf city. Can anyone say Erebor? But I really loved this. It was really cute, the determination that She-Dwarf had to go and find the like ancestral dwarven home to kind of prove that she wasn't the last dwarf left. And through her quest, she meets a lot of different characters that help her on her quest. There's this like real sense of found family with all of these creatures, and like some of them are interesting. There's one that's like a shark head. Yeah, he has a shark head. And yeah, one of them has a bird head, and he's always shirtless. There's a lot of different characters, and some of them help our main character along the way, some of them hinder her. She-Dwarf always has this like determination to keep going, and she's very fierce. She's also a fantastic warrior, putting that out there. She has an axe and it's awesome. You know, there is this thing of like, you know, the beard being sacred, and it is a female dwarf with a beard, which they are in Tolkien. But this has a lot of classic Tolkien elements with these mythical creatures, with them going on a quest, and it is a very typical fantasy quest. But I really love the art in this. It really fit with the story. I highly recommend. It deserves way more praise than it's gotten. It's a really fun time and I highly recommend it. So next up, a book that kind of reminds me of Middle-earth. Bear with me here, because this is fantasy romance. But that is Radiance by Grace Draven. I adore this book with everything I have. It is one of the best fantasy romances I've ever read. We have an arranged marriage between people of 2 different species. Neither of them want to get married. They both think the other race is absolutely hideous, which is hilarious. They actually form this really, really beautiful friendship, and then they learn to love each other along the way. And it was really, really beautiful. I love this so much. But the reason this kind of does remind me of Middle-earth is because of our character here, Brishan, who is part of the Kai, and the Kai are very orc-esque. So the Kai, they have this grey skin, they are larger, like taller and wider, but the Kai also have these like long black nails, they have these dark eyes, and they don't really like the light. They have different taste buds to humans. They find potatoes to be the most disgusting thing ever, which, like, you know, potato, cook them, mash them, put them in a stew. Potatoes. So good. But the Kai are also warriors, and they're very skilled warriors. That's kind of what they do all the time, is fight. It was just enough orc-like abilities that were like, okay, yeah, They do also have their own language, which the orc do have their own language. It is like a bastardized version of Elvish. This is really good. It is definitely the most like departure from Middle-earth that I have here, but an orc-like creature who is good. Like, the Kai are not evil. Brishan is just a sweetie, and he loves Ildiko with everything that he is, and it's beautiful, and I love it. And this definitely deserves all the praise that it has. It's beautiful. So again, we're going for a bit of a departure from the classic Middle-earth type thing. But for this one, I'm choosing Wren, an LGBT reimaginings of Scottish folklore, poems by Rachel Plummer, and illustrated by Helene Beaupert. So this is a poetry collection, and it is, you know, what it says. There's some cute little drawings in here, like some really, really good ones. And it is just a bunch of short little poems, and they're poems about different Scottish folklore things. So there are Kelpie, Wolvers, fairies, Nimblemen, Brownies, Changeling, Gilly Doo, Loch Ness, the Green Lady. So, you know, things like that, but just with a queer setting. Now, the reason I'm kind of comparing this to Middle-earth is, again, a lot of the creatures, but also just the whimsy. So this does have a lot of whimsy because it is poetry, and I find that Lord of the Rings does have that kind of whimsy and this particular type of storytelling that is almost fairy tale-esque, but not. And this kind of has that with these fairy tale reimagining type things, or folklore reimaginings. I do just think this book also just deserves way more hype because it's beautiful, and Scottish folklore is amazing, but making it queer is even more amazing. And it just kind of wraps you in a warm blanket and takes you on this little journey. And it's really special, and I just want more people to read this. So next up is The Glamour Thieves by Don Allman, and this is the first in the Blue Unicorn trilogy, I think it is. This is different. So this is queer, which was great, and it's like fantasy sci-fi, because it's kind of like there is these fantastical creatures. There's this like technology thing, and there are cars and kind of futuristic, and it's an interesting time. But this is a relationship between an orc and an elf. This had a really gritty quality to it, and this orc is kind of on this like on a job, because they are thieves, and he's on this job to reclaim something, take something from someone. He runs across this elf every so often. They are exes, so they are no longer together. So there is that like dynamic between the two that's a bit like charged, and there is definitely some interesting sex scenes in there. And there is also something to do with the elf having this kind of hypnotic power, almost like a siren in a way. It has that kind of quality to it, and that occasionally makes the orc uncomfortable. He's a bit more like Shire. Funny. But the thing I just found most interesting about this was this amalgamation of fantasy and sci-fi. It was really interestingly done, because there was a lot of magical elements to it. Like, there was legitimate magic being done, but there was this almost like artificial intelligence in a way. All the way technology was integrated into this fantasy world was a really fascinating concept. And of course, I love there's an orc and an elf, and they're together. There was a little bit of like a found family thing going on in certain places, and it was really interesting. So this is a bit of like an action-packed book as well. There are gunfights, there's helicopters and car chases and all those things that you'd kind of expect from like an action movie. There are also hackers, and they have these like networks in their mind that helps them hack into things. So that's kind of where that sci-fi element comes into it. Then, you know, there is still like the elf doing magical spells. So it was a really interesting concept between the two. I definitely want to go back and like reread this and then maybe continue on with the series, because it had some really interesting concepts. And I did love the orc character. He's such a sweetie and like needs to be protected a little bit. I mean, it's so queer. Like, it's not just our two main characters that are gay, there is a bunch of side characters who are also gay or different types of queer identities, and it's awesome. And I do recommend this because I think there is a lot of people that would enjoy this. And then lastly is The Novice by Taryn Matheru, which is the first in the Summoner series. There was really like one element of this that really had me thinking of Middle Earth, and that was the dwarf character, who was one of my favorites. But this is about this young boy, kind of from a lower class in this fantasy world, and he goes to a summoner school where you can like summon demons and they help fight things, or you bring them back from their world. It was an interesting concept, and I found it hard to get my head around what was happening, but I think that's very much a me thing. Definitely a me thing. I know so many people that love this series, and it was really good. So there was this kind of like almost dark academia vibe to it, which was really interesting, but it is a fantasy setting, and our main character is kind of one of the least skilled in his class, and he kind of teams up with a bunch of other like the outcasts of the school, if you will, and one of them happens to be a dwarf, and they become like best friends, and I really love that. And just the culture of this dwarf was fascinating. There was a lot of underground things that were happening that I loved. You know, there was this whole society of dwarves and them trying to be seen as good guys, because I think there was some war potentially that made them not seem like the good guys, but they are, or at least most of them are. And, you know, this young dwarf is at this school to be like, we're here, accept us kind of thing. And the friendship that these two had was really beautiful. It was very brotherly and like brothers in arms, and, you know, that really strong platonic bond, and I loved that. And just this dwarf's culture is awesome. Again, the beards are important because of course they are. Ow, your tail is very hard, you know. Your tail is very, very hard. Yes, it is. There was some really interesting concepts within this dwarven culture, and that's kind of always something I love about Middle Earth. The dwarves are my favourite, so that's partly why I really like The Novice, is because we do get this dwarven culture, and it's not the same as the dwarven culture in Middle Earth, but it's still a dwarven culture that is really fascinating, and it seems really well thought out as well. But anyways, that was my 5 Friday video on Middle Earth-esque stories. So if you like Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit or Middle Earth, give these 5 books a go, see what you think of them. I will admit I stretched a few of them, but I just really wanted to talk about certain books, so I did. If you have any more recommendations that you think are Middle Earth-esque without being high fantasy, let me know, because I'd be interested in reading some of those. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!